you build your brand and you build that brand independent of the company, though you may love them as you can, certainly as a person of color, because you want to show the value that you can provide that is independent of, who you end up working for or even the business you have at that time. Because that value can, again, it's harder for someone to be like, oh, that Noelle, they'll be like, but I mean, she was just on NBC Nightly News. She got mentioned in Forbes. Like, what do you, I don't know. It doesn't match up. But when there's nothing, that
Then
voice becomes
it becomes
much louder.
bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
Welcome to the Rosie Effect. Have you joined our community yet? Head on over to therosieeffect.com. That's TheRosieEffect.com and subscribe. Joining our community of amazing, boss, diverse, emerging leaders really looking to level up in their career, build out their career, or if they see themselves being able to build out externally into businesses that are really creating impact and change in our world today. We see the challenges that we face from building our careers to building out a business idea to be attractive for funding. And so this safe space of the Rosie Effect is a community for emerging leaders like yourself to come in and equip themselves with the right skill set, the right positioning, to go from ideation to launch and implementation, to level up in skill set, to get on for that new role or new promotion. We're breaking through all those roadblocks at the Rosie Effect, equipping you with the keys to be able to leverage tech innovation to build out your vision. As usual, I'm your host, Rosie Amponsa. This week's conversation is on the impact of technology around you. Yes, listen in. This is about you. I sit down with Noelle Silver. Noelle Silver is the VP of Solutions Architecture at ElectrifiAI, leading a team that empowers customers to solve business problems with applied AI. Noelle is a multi-award-winning technologist who specializes in conversational AI and voice technology. So we're really breaking it down today. What is AI all about? We're hearing about it. We know it's there. It's impactful. There's opportunity maybe for business. But why does it matter to me, and what should I care about it in order to leverage it? You want to get into this conversation. Noelle has led teams at NPR, Microsoft, Amazon, and is the founder of Lovefluencers and the AI Leadership Institute. She's passionate about mindful leadership, authentic personal branding, and the ethical and responsible use of technology in business. She was recently awarded the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Award for Artificial Intelligence and is an influencer in voice and AI globally. This was an amazing conversation to sit down with such a force in tech who really breaks down something that we can make so complex within the space of tech and able to identify opportunities that we can leverage within our careers, we can leverage within our business ideas. All right, join in on the conversation. We're just gonna hop into this interview
So,
because like we're in, especially with 2020, right? It has transformed
yeah.
so much for us. This could be really an amazing opportunity for us to push it a bit. As human beings, we like normalcy, we like consistency, and when things change, it's like we don't even know how to operate in that. So how do
Yep.
you go about doing what is radical, right? Because we see it as radical. How do you go about making such a decision, especially since you have children? There's so many layers to you having to make that decision. How do you do that?
Yeah, the number one thing I think I do in the morning that helps me is I write down my goals. And I don't write down like all the things. Like it's not a to-do list. It's literally these like maybe 1 to 3 year goal. And I have a personal one, a professional one, and a financial one. And I write them down every day. And I do it in the morning. And I have a book. It's in my office upstairs. And it's the sentences somewhat change structure a little bit. But it's almost like an affirmative statement, right? I say it as if it's already true. But what that does is it sets my mindset up for opportunity, right? I always refer to this reticular activation system. Kind of when you think about something or focus on something, you start to see it everywhere.
And you envision it.
Where,
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, and you never like if you didn't do that, it would still be there. You just wouldn't see it. Your brain would filter it out because it doesn't know that it's important. So I feel like that first step of saying, this is important to me. Like having, financial stability and building wealth for my family and
Hmm. I
like
feel
having
that.
a
I feel
job
that.
that
I'm
I
on that
love
journey,
and
so I feel that.
yes,
So every
yes.
day, do you write something new, or is it the consistent things that you constantly writing so you can visualize it?
Yeah, it's the same thing, but I don't, it's not like I'm copying it. It's not like I read the thing above and copy the same words. I know what it is. So I'll say, for example, like it'll show up differently every day, but it's something about like my financial goals. Sometimes it's got a number in it. Sometimes it's just like taking care of my family and having security, but it's around the same thing. They do often look almost exactly the same, but I don't write them from like copy them. I'm like
Copy
writing
because
them from
you know
memory.
it, so it's a matter of
Right.
you kind of writing it from heart and kind of
Yes.
visualizing into reality. And every morning you write this down.
Yes. And feel, and this is the trick, I think, or the secret is that you have to feel as if it's true. And so I spend time like getting goosebumps and getting excited and literally seeing myself with all of these things true. And then as I go throughout my day, things happen. People are introduced to me, conversations like this happen, and little doors are opened. And I'm like, and it looks crazy to an onlooker, right? They're like, oh my gosh, you just took action on
And you just
that.
did
you just,
this.
why
It
would
blows
you do
people's
that?
mind. Yeah.
But I know what my goals are. I know what and I always refer to it as kind of like a pot that's boiling. And that if you like have a pot that's boiling, you put a cover on this pot. If you lift it up to look at that water, it takes forever to come to a boil. But
You
if you
just
put a lid on
keep
it
it
and
on
you leave
there.
it alone, right? And that looking at it, I kind of see as like sharing it with people. It's why I never really articulate exactly my goals to anyone else. It's kind of like lifting the lid off and like letting
And
all the
letting it
steam out,
go. Got it, got it,
right?
got
So
it.
I
I
like
love that
I keep it locked
analogy.
up.
I love
Yeah,
it.
and I let it build within myself
Yeah.
so that I can do the work because that's ultimately what it ends up being. Like I'm the one who has to do the work. And we all have those people in our lives, the dream squashers, where we say a thing and bless their heart, but
Bless
they're
their heart,
like,
but they don't know any better. You know, they don't know any better. Like, there
that's
is better
right.
for you in life if you want
That's
it.
right. That's right. And they're very quick to be like, but my experience has shown when you step out, you get hurt. And I don't come from that place. I'm like, when I step out, I learn. I might get hurt, but I learn. And I've
You're
had those,
learning. Yeah.
we've all had bad
Obviously.
lessons,
Obviously, yeah.
but it's the mindset, right? You take where, yeah, I just think it's better to keep it in my little pot and let that energy build and start to see results. And then if I choose to, I can share it. But
Share it
those
if need
early
be.
days of goal building and goal setting and moving the direction of my goal, yeah, I keep it covered up and building within me and doing things in my own world before I start sharing it with others where their opinions, whether I like it or not, will influence my decisions. They become a little voice in your head of like, are you sure you could do that? You didn't get a degree in that. There's no one else that looks like that.
Hmm.
No one
Hmm.
else in your family does that. And so I just like, no, not going to let those voices. I have enough of those voices in my head
In your own
anyway.
head, right? It's like you're fighting your own.
Yes,
Oh, you know,
yes,
we could go days for this
I
because
know.
I'm first generation in so many aspects of education, work, all of that stuff, and so
Yes,
these things are so vital for us to push past our own mental blocks so that we're able to live in that in what we feel is our purpose, what we feel we're destined to come and create that impact for others. um
yes.
but so you recently started an AI school and you've been with Microsoft, you've been with AWS. What got you into tech in the first place? And especially in the now, where are you seeing opportunity that individuals that are interested both from an entrepreneurial perspective or building out their career should be thinking about or taking advantage of? Take it away.
Yes. Well, as a parent, I now appreciate what my father did for me. But at a very young age, 6, 7 years old, my dad introduced me to the beautiful golden age of science fiction,
Oh,
where we were
wow.
watching movies, reading books, talking about it, talking about the future in a way that wasn't like it wasn't school, right? It was like fantasy and computers were this inherent part of that world. And at that point, I didn't know that those things were possible.
Right,
I am
right.
today working on tech that is exactly the things I read back then. And my dad, of course, is like, "This is crazy." But we have
I don't even
devices
think
we
he
can
knew what he
talk
was
to.
doing when he introduced
No,
you.
No. So
Exactly.
I always had that seed of like, this is normal. Like you could dream this. He actually thought I would become an author and write science fiction as opposed to like science fact. But those early seeds of like, this is okay for you to want this and have fun with this, that really, and I didn't know, but I was put on a path where I started again seeing technology in different areas. I went to a technical college or university, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I ended up seeking out because I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by this dream in my head and how it could become reality. But I think the trigger, so I always ended up being in tech because I had an affinity and a passion for it.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening about 7 years ago is I was at AWS doing like a general job. I was a training manager, helping trainers learn how to teach cloud. It was very kind of boring. I mean, it's probably not boring to people not in cloud, but it was not a fancy job. It was
Okay.
not high profile.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I found was I was given an opportunity. Email came into my inbox saying we're looking for people to join Alexa, and Alexa didn't exist then. It hadn't gone live. They were looking for new, fresh perspectives and people willing to learn the technology and teach others. And I said yes. And I remember talking to my hiring manager, talking to my colleagues, and they were all like, "You're crazy. You can't do that. You don't know anything about that. You can't have that. That's like," I remember my hiring manager being like, "Yeah, you're not going to be able to be successful in that role."
That's above you.
Yes. Like that is, you are out of your britches. I was like, and I took that in and thought about it. And then I said, but this is one of those moments where we always look back on and go, that was a moment we should have taken it and we don't. I knew in that moment, this is like a thing. Alexa's going to be a thing. I just can sense it.
But
And
wait
so
though,
I
how did
went
you
and
sense
dove
that,
in.
right? Because everyone around you is like this. We all know we do
No.
cool things, but
Yeah,
what
yeah.
stood out to you that it was like, wait a minute, let me go ahead and push forward with this?
Yes, and actually, it's such a good question because I have two people in my life that are not. Technology is not easily accessible to them. My dad lives with me; he's in his 70s, but he had gotten hit by a car
Oh,
that year. He was in the ICU for 6 months with a seat collar and looking up at the sky,
oh wow.
and he had no access. He couldn't use a smartphone, couldn't lift up a computer. He had no access to technology. And when I got Alexa, I literally remember giving him our beta device that I got because I happened to work on the team.
Oh
And
wow.
it changed. And I got the beta device before I said I wanted to be a solutions architect. I just wanted to be in the tech. But the lights that would go off, the energy that he felt being able to ask, I'll tell you, the very first time he used it, he asked for a radio station he listened to as a kid. And he's on a bed in the ICU looking up the ceiling. And I'm like, hey, I got this thing. You can talk to it. You can say anything you
Right,
want.
right.
And he said, oh my gosh, I'd love to listen to, this call station, to a
Uh-huh.
classical music station in New
Uh-huh.
York. And it started to play. And I get teary eyed just thinking about it because his whole
The
demeanor was
hairs on
like,
the back of my neck is standing up right now. Like
I'm
shivers go
telling
down my
you,
spine when I hear these kind of stories. Like this is how much
I'm telling
technology
you.
impacts us. And I think
Yes,
sometimes people underestimate the power of how much, especially folks that might not be in tech and they're like, "Oh no, this is a thing over there." And it's
yes,
like, "No, it impacts us at the core." Oh,
that's right.
okay, go
And
ahead.
so when you get that email and and I have my son. So my son's another similar story. He's
Yes, you
got Down
said.
syndrome.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
limited. He uses voice for everything now, but in 2014, that was just starting to become available to him. And I saw that he was able to now start searching for things and doing things with his voice that he could not do with his
Wow.
hands. And
Wow.
I just saw the world differently. And so when I saw this opportunity to go be part, and the one thing I do look for is how many people, like, am I going to a space where everyone's a PhD and I don't have a college degree? I went to college. I just left early because I did the same thing in high school. I went to high school. I just didn't like it very much. So I took early admission, left a year
And
early,
got it
left it as
done.
a junior.
Well, if my
Yeah.
nieces
And
heard this, they will be really
I
delighted because
know.
they're not about school right now. So don't be too loud.
Exactly. I tell my kids, I'm like, I will not be telling you my story until you're
Exactly.
done. Don't Google me. But
Oh
yes,
man.
I think it's important because we have these presumptions of what it takes to be successful.
Mm.
And really what it took was me to have this. innate desire to solve problems for these. It turned out these two very specific people in my life, but they represented a entire demographic of
Of
people,
course.
elderly
Of
and kids with
course.
special needs. And then when you serve those people, you end up serving a whole bunch of other people,
Yeah.
right? Because they're like,
Yeah.
even though that was built for my son with, but all my kids love the special things that he does,
Of
like the games
course.
he gets to play, and right, it serves everyone. So
Wow.
that's why I chose it, was not because it was a cool tech thing to do, but because I actually personally had
You had
challenges I
that.
wanted solved with that technology.
Wow.
And there was an open door that said, you don't need to know anything, and that says something about leadership too, though, is that leadership has to be willing to say, we want your aptitude, we want your ability to learn, we want your potential, and you can come and know nothing and learn it on the job. And almost
Mm.
everything in AI is that
Mm.
way these days.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, to answer the second part of your question, like if you're just listening to this and wondering, like, oh my gosh, what could I do? What could I get involved in? I mean, Alexa and voice technology in general on Google Home, on Bixby, like embedding voice experiences, no one's really figured out how to do that in an amazing way.
Yeah.
But those who have done it well were not native to the craft. They were people like sociologists, psychologists,
Because they
people who were
understood
like
the need. There was a
of
problem
the
they
human.
experienced.
Yes, yes.
Whoo! Yes, 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 yes.
So if you are empathetic to like human challenges,
Mm-hmm.
voice,
Mm-hmm.
what's the best way you could find a way to allow those people, those humans you care about, to use their voice to get help? Like in all sorts of things, help like getting their bills paid, figuring out their banking. Like there's so many
Yes,
different use
so many
cases.
facets. So tell me a
Yes.
bit about the school that you have right now and what aspects of AI are you teaching? Where do you see opportunity?
Yeah, so I created the AI Leadership Institute specifically because, and it has leadership in it intentionally, because the tech is actually not as complicated as people think. There's free code camps right now. It's at freecodecamp.com or
Very true.
.org, right? You can go out, you can learn to code. If you have the passion, you can go. All coding is rote memorization and practical application, like just fingers on keyboard, writing code.
Got it.
Everyone starts knowing nothing, and people just get better the more that they write it. So it's like learning a language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can
Mm-hmm.
learn a language if you actually want to. If you don't and you hate learning languages, you won't probably enjoy coding
I agree
either.
with you. No, I've tested at least some of them from Ruby to all of these ones. I've at least gotten my fingers in there and I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, this is cool. I get it, but
yeah,
no thank you.
yeah,
I will stick to
yeah.
the
There's
side
like
where I can.
structures in your
It
mind that
does.
you
And the
can be
beauty
like,
about it is,
yeah,
I think sometimes people might think that, oh, I just need to be in a super duper technical role. But you've clearly shown that it's about, for us, where we get the need on the consumer side and we get the technology enough to be able to connect the dots. A lot of
yes,
tech organizations are looking for that unique person. And a lot of us
yes.
have that skill set coming from different backgrounds that can be translated and sort of connecting the dots for the customer, for the business, and you know what I mean, being able to grow that and push that forward.
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
And I always try to remind people like the engineers are one part of the puzzle. And if the engineers were left to themselves, they wouldn't actually solve the problem.
Mm.
We need people who understand the problem domain. We call them product owners, product managers.
Mm-hmm.
We also need people who are the glue between the two. We call them solutions architects or technical program managers. They're not like, you don't have to know how to code to do those jobs. You just need to be empathetic to what the user is asking for
Mm-hmm.
and be able
Mm-hmm.
to translate that to an engineer who's like, what do you mean they want, like, I don't understand
I
what
don't,
they
yeah,
want.
because I'm just here to do X, Y, and Z, and
Right.
because they're good, right? But they're specific, and so when
Yes.
you have that, yes, oh, hidden right on,
Yes.
Noel.
Yeah. And much of our technology today, unfortunately, is built exactly that way. It served the people who built it, they kind of built it for themselves. And if you look
Yes.
at tech, that is a very homogeneous group of people. They all look a certain way, they all talk a certain way, they all went to the same universities. And so we have to, I always say this, we have to change the DNA of engineering in general so that those products that leave, they serve everyone.
Oh my
And so that's
gosh.
why a lot more, you'll see, you're seeing this now, a lot more universities, a lot more boot camps are targeting diversity of thought in people who attend. That it's not just about learning to code, it's really about how do you think and how
How
can
are
you
you solving
translate your
problems?
unique thinking
Mm-hmm.
into product
Mm-hmm.
and into software.
I think individuals coming from diverse backgrounds really have a unique opportunity in this era to realize that there's a huge gap, there's a huge opportunity that we're looking for you to be able to fill that. I'm also interested
Yes.
to get your perspective on how organizations leadership can look at actually creating spaces and seeing the true value in what you just mentioned right now, right? In this era, a lot has happened with racial tension, and organizations have sort of made a pledge or they've signed their name to something, and all that is
Yep.
great and exciting, right?
Yep.
But how are we translating that from the conversation to actual implementation?
Yes. Well, I don't know how real we want to get.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry. This is the Rosie effect. And so, sis, give it to me, please.
yeah, well, there have been several examples recently, but the reality is, and I've been doing this now 20 years,
I
being a
bet. Yeah.
woman of color in tech. The louder we are, and we at least we've got the world stage that has been like, oh, this race thing, we should talk about it. But
This
even right
race
in this,
thing.
yeah,
Oh,
this
man.
moment that we're in right now, we're even on the tail end of excitement, right? We're seeing the lull in those conversations, the dying down of the movement, if you will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we may not notice it directly, but I see it because I've seen it before where something happens, a trigger point occurs, we go and say, see, this is the problem. We've had this
Yo.
problem for years. And then we do a little bit, like you said, we change our manifestos, we
Man.
modify our
We
goals.
get on public platforms.
Yes. And we as a company are perceived to care about this. But the reality is that the managers, the middle managers, the layers within an organization, they haven't actually changed at all, at least in my 20 years. Those same glass ceilings exist, those same, I call it wing clipping, those
Hmm.
same conversations where somebody goes in, is ambitious, wants to help a company
Hmm.
deliver on their results,
Yeah.
and a manager, maybe they're threatened, who knows what their motive is, but they say, you know what, this is your lane, stay in your lane, be
Mm.
quiet, sit down,
Mm.
don't talk about
Mm.
diversity, don't talk about the fact that we don't have women on our board, don't talk about the fact that there's only one person of color and they happen to head up diversity in our company. Like there's so many wrong, like it's systemic. And that window, which is why there was a report done recently by
Hmm.
the Gates Foundation called Reboot Representation.
Okay.
And it was all about, we're doing a good job getting people into tech. What we're really failing at is keeping them there.
Yeah.
Because many, especially
Yeah.
Gen Z, once they have a bad experience, they're like, I
We're
can
done.
do my own thing. I
Yeah.
don't need to do this. I
Yeah.
don't need I don't know if you know NPR. I went to NPR as a head of engineering, and I met Nina Totenberg, who, 20 years ago
Hmm.
was the very few women correspondents on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
And what she had said to me in a session was, we're the suck it up generation. And I kind of feel that way. Like we had bad behavior was the norm and we just sucked it up and worked harder. And
Uh-uh.
my entire career was like, if I work twice as hard, I can be seen as equal. Three times as hard, four times as hard. If somebody needed to get one cert, I would get four because I needed to show that I'm the same.
Yeah.
And that hasn't changed,
No. No, it has not.
right? And I still see good people getting let go from companies who push that sore part of the organization, who go and like poke at it and say, this is still broken, this is
Hmm.
still broken.
Hmm.
And it's I don't know, like one thing I was like, how can I fix this? All right, I can go into education and I can fix the education system that would then
Mm.
funnel new people in. But until the leadership actually changes, and I don't mean high up, every CEO has this story down. It is three levels into an org. It's the
Mm.
first line, second line managers
Mm.
who see potential and go, no, not you. I mean, I used to call it the golden boy syndrome, where I
Of
would have, if
course.
I compared them, a person of color who would be in the same role 12 years and see no progress,
Yeah.
although they've gained the experience and they
Yeah.
actually even do the work, and
Yes.
another person come in who is not a person of color and comes in and within months or maybe a year gets a promotion and is now that person's boss
I see it all
with
the time.
all the time.
All the
So
time.
so my call, of course, to myself and in all of my like mindful meditative moments is like, what is mine to do to change this.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I go and I'm one of the wound pokers, right? I'm like, this is broken here. We
Mm-hmm.
have to fix it. And it makes me unattractive over time.
Hmm.
They love it at first
Hmm.
because they can sell me
They
as
sell
like,
you, they put you at the
we have
forefront,
Noelle. She cares about this. That means we care about this.
and
But
then
then,
eventually they realize you mean business.
yes. And they're like, yeah, I'm not sure you're going to work out here. And that's what happens, right? So
Wow.
I'm not, yeah, I'm trying to work with as many organizations because I do think it's a systemic challenge, and we're going to need to build new companies that have new leadership
Hmm.
that are really going to overcome these kind of more ancient thinking
Wow.
organizations.
Wow.
I had this older woman say to me
Mm-hmm.
last year when I was at the peak of my frustration, and she said, honey, she's like 65 in
Yeah.
the business. And she's like, honey, an entire generation of people will have to retire or die before what you want will happen. Like, just so almost like
But
you
she
should
ain't
just
lying
not.
though. She ain't lying because once you create a habit, that's not something that, and especially if the habit benefits you, the habit
Yes,
benefits people that look like
yes,
you. I'm pretty direct in saying, look, especially in tech, we see it. A lot of our leaders are white and male. It's
yeah,
there, right? And some of them might speak to the rigor and the value of seeing equity, diversity, inclusion within our business line. But the
yes,
question becomes, where does the accountability play? How do you measure success? How are you putting this in the forefront when you talk about it and you get on stages and you put it out there? How are you actually translating that? Like you said, leadership might have it all beautifully bowled up, but when we look into 3 layers down, how is that playing out in your organization? And where
that's
does the
right.
responsibility lie for you to be able to see that transcend across the organization?
That's right. And when it comes to, I always am looking at like not only hiring diversity, making sure your team as you hire them, but once they're on board,
That
I am
culture.
always shocked that when we look at each individual, one, we're not looking at individuals. So as a company, you actually miss, and I've seen entire organizations in some of the biggest companies, they miss. I'm like, how do you miss this person sitting right here who's out like a top performer? How do you not promote them? How do you not? And it's the little things, right? Like, oh, we have an opportunity with a publisher to write a book, and they go to their buddy, and they don't make it an equally distributed
Of course not.
opportunity.
Of course
And
not.
so what ends up happening, like me, I'm going to the field. I'm hiring instructors right now to teach the program that I've built,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking at the field, and the horrible thing, it's funny but funny sad, is that the target person I'm looking for, they won't exist because they were never given the opportunity to get elevated to that place.
Oh,
So we're at
ooh.
like it's so systemic that I've weeded them out because they would have never gotten that promotion. They would have never become a senior director,
Right,
right? They'll
right.
be the 12-year veteran as a senior manager because they got passed over. And so I had to really teach my company that we can't look for titles, we can't look for placement. We actually can't even look for skills because companies wouldn't have invested in these people, right? So they won't get the training that their white counterparts would have gotten. I
Wow.
mean, it's
So then how
but
are
we could
you
change
what are
it.
you looking at then? How are you able to project potential success or looking at it
Yes.
from historical success?
Yeah, so I look for aptitude, which is kind of what my success story is in my career. I
Mm-hmm.
look for people who build, and there's lots of people out there who find ways to, because most of us who are ambitious, if we are blocked at work, it shows up in other ways. We start a
Yes.
nonprofit, we serve on a board. So those are the things I look for. And so for those of us, and the sad thing is a lot of us feel trapped before we hit this revelation of like, oh, we
Uh-huh.
can actually do more, even if it's not through our
Mm.
company. But if you're
Mm.
trapped, like get on these boards. I love the fact that NASDAQ and California have both now mandated women be on their boards.
Mm.
Please let
Mm.
that not just all be white women. Like,
Hmm.
but it's also a double-edged
Oh
sword because we as
man.
people of color won't even raise our hands in some of these situations, right? Imposter syndrome is
Is
twice,
real.
three
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's even worse for us. And so we're like, I know a guy who could do that really well, even though we're the perfect candidate. Even if we are approached by someone, we're like, oh, yeah, no, I don't know. I'm not exactly the person you're probably looking for. and we dismiss our own talents and our own capabilities. So, like I said, it's so multifaceted that even if we fixed the pipeline and people were going to certain individuals for roles,
Hmm.
they wouldn't even apply because they don't themselves feel like they're qualified, even though they are. And mostly that's because they've been continuously told they're not good enough.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's where I do think, like, what I do is I'm like, what are you doing if you're a technologist? What are you doing on GitHub outside of your job?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing with other companies? Did you start your own company? Are you coaching and mentoring with other people?
Mm.
How do you demonstrate it? I have another brand called Lovefluencers,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about empathetic and kindness in personal branding. But the first thing I tell people is like, go build your own website, like go and create your name.com
Mm-hmm.
and get your own brand and just start. It's not really promoting yourself, it's just the stuff you do,
Put it all
blog
in one
about it.
place. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
put your journey out there. And it'll start off being on like small podcasts and small things like through your own network.
Yeah.
But then as you continue to do it, you'll get, I mean, I ended up on NBC Nightly News as a fluke because I was in the right place at the
At the
right
right
time.
time.
But it was only because NBC's producer could Google me, go to my website and be like, oh, she's done some things,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're, especially people of color, we have to toot our own horn
This idea of
because that,
tooting the horn and being
yes,
comfortable doing it, right?
yes,
Um,
yes. And knowing it's okay and that you can do it with kindness and empathy and
yeah.
as an act of service, that your personal journey could actually is going
No,
to
it
serve
is. It
people.
is super
Yes,
duper. It's so beneficial. And sometimes, maybe if we think about it as this journey, this purpose life that we're on, it's actually not about us. And if
right.
others are able to see the work that we've put out there, it is actually meant to inspire them in whatever areas that we're sort of on that
Yes.
journey for, you know?
Yeah, I always talk about people who, we're one chapter ahead of somebody, one page ahead of somebody. And so if we were just willing to say, I got stuck on this page or I got stuck here, I had this horrible thing happen, but then I overcame, it's so easy for us to identify as the bad part of our story.
Mm.
And all of us right now, if we look at our lives, we're all overcomers. We've
Mm-hmm.
all overcome
Mm-hmm.
every bad thing that's ever happened to us because we are where we are right now. And the more we can articulate that to people, because I do think, I mean, I've felt this myself. I have felt alone in certain challenges that I have had.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other end, when I'm like, all right, it wasn't so bad, and I share it with someone, almost every time they're like, oh my gosh, I felt that. Oh my gosh, that's happened. Oh, I've had that conversation. And I'm like, gosh, I felt like I was the only person.
That was experiencing it. What about the individual that is not in tech right now? You know, it's like, all right, I see what's popping up on this side of the fence. It's pretty cool. How am I positioning myself to find an opportunity? Whether it's connecting my skill set, what does that path look like? How should I go about creating a path into tech?
Yes, this is great. So I personally feel like the best thing to do is to just start coding. So I'll tell you from my experience, I went to Alexa as a solutions architect and I had never built, I mean, Alexa was brand new. No one had ever built for Alexa before.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I went to those who did know how to build, and this would be equivalent to like free code camp, where they go in and in Alexa's time, they built these things, templates. They were on GitHub, they were examples of code, fully working skills that you could copy and paste and use. And so what I did was I ended up building from scratch, rebuilding, I should say, every one of those samples. Now, this actually echoes how I learned tech to begin with. So when I first got into tech to get my very first job, I went to Barnes and Noble and I would buy computer books. And I was one of the
Really?
very few. I would go every single page, every little project they ask you to do. I would get on my computer and I would do every lab exercise.
Wow.
The unique thing about that was that so few people actually did that. So when I talked, even though it was all book work,
Uh
like it
huh.
was no real work, I was so much more versed, like well versed
Mm-hmm.
in different things like problems that I had when my code wouldn't compile, when I had the wrong JVM version. Like I could speak to all of these challenges that they had every day. And it was just because I spent the time
To
doing
actually
the
go
work.
in there. Yeah. Yeah.
So I always encourage people, if you're into tech, like it actually doesn't matter if you start from nothing. This is the groundwork has been laid. So figure out your niche. I'd encourage voice tech because it's cool and fun, and you get to create accessibility for software
What did you
to
say?
people who don't have it.
Voice?
Voice tech. Yeah, building for Alexa or building for Google.
Mm-hmm.
Because to give you an example, Alexa has created this three-pronged approach to building skills. One is no code development. So you can go into blueprints.amazon.com, and I'll send it to you so you can put it in the show notes. But
Yes.
blueprints.amazon.com, and there are 70 blueprints. No code is necessary, just a good content idea, and you can create a skill and publish it to the world. Everything from blogs, you could write a blog and have it published on Alexa. You
Uh-huh.
can even create a choose your own adventure story, like
That
on
sounds pretty
Alexa.
cool. Wow.
um, and so there's so many, and you could use those skills to
Uh-huh.
actually teach something or create a coaching
Oh.
program, or like there's so many things you could do. But the fact that it's no code allows you, as it someone who knows a problem that you want to solve or
Uh-huh.
has content you want to get out to the world, this is a good foray or start to do that. And then the next thing is low code, like using some kind of tooling to help you build. And in voice, there's voice flow is what it's called. And this app allows you to drag and drop little boxes and create a more sophisticated solution. It's like the next step. It's a little bit of code.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, once you do that a couple times, you start to get super excited because you're starting to see solutions that work. And now maybe you're willing, because you've got this momentum, to go and learn JavaScript, right? Do go through and build your skill set in the
Something around
technology
that.
so
Yeah.
you can do more
Yeah.
tech things.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you decide, actually, I just want to be the product owner, or I want to get into design. Conversational design is a huge area of growth right now where people want to create, we've all seen chatbots on
Yes.
websites.
Yes.
Most of them are horrible. So,
Yes.
how do we create those better experiences? And if
Yeah.
you're a good human who knows how to communicate, you're already set up to be successful in that area. so,
Mm.
so those are the things I look for, is like this ramp to adoption, right? A no code, low code, and then full code kind of, and being able to deploy solutions along the way, like
Uh-huh.
getting quick
Uh-huh.
wins. And I feel like that's one of the ways to do
to
it.
to be able to build it. Now let's
Yeah.
look at what we say could be, everyone is figuring out, is Alexa listening to us when we're not there? Is this voice thing listening to us when we're not there? The fear or the concern that comes with deploying AI solutions into the marketplace. What is your take on that in terms of safety security on the individual level?
Yeah, well, I always, when this comes up quite a bit, as a matter of fact, there's about 30% of the planet that's like, I'm never going to buy a device like that
Right,
because it's
right.
listening to me. However, and I always make this analogy, this thing right here, this thing is way worse or
we
better,
we
right?
play
It
we play a
listens.
game at this point with my friends where it's like, all right, we just have this conversation. Whomever can find the ad first, that's where we are right now at this point.
That's right. And it doesn't have to do with Alexa, right? Like this, the data privacy concern is a industry-wide systemic problem.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Alexa or voice. It has everything to do with big tech companies and their responsibility in what they do with this information.
Mm.
Now, one thing I am happy to see is that we've got a really large community of African American women specifically that are focused on research in how does this situation, privacy, security, how does it impact
Yeah.
certain demographics?
Yes.
And so things like algorithmic fairness
Mm-hmm.
and interpretability of models, being able to know, like whenever you build a machine learning model or computer, software that makes a decision, you should know exactly what variables were used to make that decision. You should
Very
know,
important. Yeah.
right? How is that data collected? What
Yeah.
kind of data did you have? And so I do think, yes, of course, it's important and a huge concern, but it's not really an Alexa problem or a voice problem, right? It's a technology problem. And Facebook,
Mm.
Google,
Mm.
all the Apple even,
Mm-hmm.
all the big
Mm-hmm.
technology companies have a part to play in that. So what can we do? I've decided to invest my time in organizations. There's one in Seattle called Mira, one in DC called Rights, but it's spelled slightly differently. But it's all about user agency when it comes to data. And we're
Mm.
really just going to need to force regulation and
Mm.
force companies to adhere to some rules. And there are none right now. There are no
Wow.
rules. So yeah,
That's
I
crazy.
it's a big problem though. So I appreciate you bringing it up, but we don't have a happy answer for
No,
it.
it's true, right? Because it's like, who's going to write the rule book?
Right.
When you look at governmental processes that are behind X amount of generations when it comes to
That's right.
technology, and then you see tech organizations, which is great because when they compete amongst each other, that means they're running a really amazing fast race. But then it
Right.
creates this gap in terms
Yes.
of the solution that you were determined to put out there. If it ends up hurting that end consumer, then who is to blame,
That's
right?
right. And when you're at like a product like Alexa, where literally everyone is your end consumer, that definitely was not considered when they built it. When they built it, and I remember thinking this, I'm like, we are building this for the 1% of the 1%. But it turns out now an entire accessibility community is looking at this, an entire elderly community. But we didn't build for them, right? We built for like, the elitists, basically, the
Yeah,
tech, bleeding edge tech people.
yeah.
But this technology has actually evolved. So what is our responsibility now as a product team to go back and figure out what should we change in order to make sure that we are considering these demographics? And that's, I think, the key as you move into these products and start working in this technology is companies. And that's one of the reasons I created the AI Leadership Institute, is that you actually have to have like an AI manifesto in a company
Mm-hmm.
that says we care about these principles or tenets of developing artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
We have to care about making sure that we act like intentionally create diversity in our data collection. We
Mm.
intentionally create diversity in the engineers building the models, in the
Hmm.
people testing the models, in the
Mm.
users that are in our beta pool. We have to set that intention because without it, those people will end up mirroring the team that built it, which means that
100%.
it'll be homogeneous in nature and we'll be right back to where we are right
Wow.
now.
Wow, 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 wow.
Yes.
I want to make sure I touched on this a little bit, which is this idea that AI is not so far fetched in this woo woo thing. So, share with me how embedded AI has really been in our lives all this while. And so, it's not
Oh, for
something that
sure.
we feel like, oh, it's in the future and it's going to. You get what I'm saying. Let me hear your
I
thoughts on
do.
that.
I do. Yeah. Many of us think like AI is not a problem or even a thing that it feels out of touch. And I know this basically, we found each other on TikTok
Yes,
where
we did.
I talk about AI and people like they say these things like it's this crazy futuristic, like Terminator Skynet thing. And I'm like, no, no, no. It's like you use it every single day. So to give some examples, early examples that we actually like is Gmail, Outlook, right? Spam, the
Yes.
ability for a piece of software to look at email and decide whether or not it's good for you or bad for you. In other words, is it intentionally meant to help you do your job or is
Mm,
it someone just sending you marketing nonsense?
mm.
If you go and look at your spam, you'll be like, thank goodness that didn't show up in my inbox. Before we had to, as individuals, I don't know if any of us remember, but we used to have to build filters and filter out nonsense. And now computers
Mm.
do that automatically. They detect patterns in an email and go, oh, no, 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 Mr. Marketer,
Mhm.
you can't play here.
Mhm.
Another very common example is around, well, of course, now most of us know Alexa and we can use our voice, but think about like even going shopping online, going to Amazon. One of the most popular things that Amazon did that we loved as its customers was when it said, we bought something and it would immediately say, well, or even before we check out, it says, this is almost always bought with these three other things.
Other,
And we're like,
yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't think I would need batteries for this toy or a cable for this monitor
Yeah.
that it,
Yeah.
you make these presumptions of what's going to be in the box. And then Amazon says, based on the data we've seen, people always buy these things together
Yeah.
and it solves our problem. We actually don't care that Amazon is using
It's
our
our
data
data to be
against
able
us,
to, yeah.
right? We want them to
Yeah.
because it creates a better experience for us. Netflix
Mm.
is the same way, right?
Mm.
We love the idea that it's bubbling up romantic comedies that it knows I'm going to
And then we're
like
gonna like,
because
yeah. Yeah.
it sees that I've liked them and I've
Mm-hmm.
watched them. It also knows the detail, like it knows how much of a movie I've watched. It
Mm.
knows that those some of those cheesy ones I actually don't like, so they start to be removed from my list. Like these are all ways that we're seeing AI used every single day.
Yeah.
But if it helps us, and I'll give you another funny, sad example. I went and did some research and I asked a room full of people,
Uh-huh.
over 100 people. I was like, if you were driving into the airport and you had an opportunity to trade off like having a like a completely smooth drop off, no
Mm-hmm.
waiting, you just drive in, drop off, and leave. All of us know some, I mean, airports are maybe a fond memory of the past, but it's usually a crazy
It's
where there's
pretty.
like people parked and it's just
It's just all
nonsense.
over the
But
place, right?
if we could, and I talked to this room, I'm like, what if I could make that super simple? And the only thing you had to do was provide me enough data to tell when you were coming, who's in your car, like surveillance data. 93% of those people said, absolutely, I would totally give you my data if you can fix that problem. And I, of course, was like, so the answer is no. And I tried to encourage them, like, convenience is such a, it's so easy for us to be like, oh, if you make my life convenient, I will
I'll
give
give
you
you
whatever you want.
everything. Yes. But you know
But
what
we
it is
don't.
though? Do
Yeah.
people understand the value of their data?
No, that's what I'm saying. We don't actually even know the use case that that data will be used for in the future. We're solving for a very specific problem we have now, but we're signing our. This is why those organizations like Rights and Mira, we are signing our life away when we check that box. We're
Yeah.
signing it all away.
Yeah.
Use it however you deem necessary.
Wow.
And I'm like,
Wow.
yeah, right? Like that means now, if you think it's necessary, I just think again now in the future of these science fiction books, if you think as a company it's necessary to monitor my movement in order to sell me a thing, or in order, like you could start manipulating placement of things in my world based on the data I gave you 10 years ago. Like we're not thinking about the longevity of these
No.
data choices we're making right
No.
now.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you watch the there was a Netflix thing about this. Did
Yes.
you what
Social dilemma.
Social Dilemma? Tell me about
Yes.
your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So first and foremost, there are an incredible, I mentioned them already. There's an incredible, I created this organization called Women in AI to highlight these women exactly. On TikTok, I did 12 Black women in AI changing the world. I did this series.
I'm gonna need to get
There
some of
are
them
women.
to chat on the Rosie effect.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh my gosh. Yes. It would be amazing because they are not, again, there wasn't a single one of them on the social dilemma. It was one of the earliest criticisms of it. It's such a good idea what they did, what they said, but they said it all through the lens of the white guy building the thing.
Who
And there are
are
so
and that
many.
you know what?
Yes.
But no, please go ahead because that hits it right on the nail. Who was the leadership making decisions talking about we're building for everyone? And this
Yes.
thing that you did for good totally reflects the reality of your organization and decision making cycle. You know?
Yes.
But please go
Yes.
ahead.
And you use the idea of diversity. You hire people of color. You tell the world that you've got this huge diversity, you've got this ethical
Mm,
workforce.
mm.
And then but that's all you want. You just want the world to know you have them. They're completely disempowered. We just had Timnit Gebru just got fired from, granted, she stated that she was fired, but I know how these conversations go.
You've been in there long
um,
enough, so you know. You
yes,
know.
yes, where, and she said like every conversation, as the louder you get about the inequities and the injustice, the less appetizing you are to that leadership team. They want you to just be quiet, just sit there and be the poster you are meant to be,
Mm.
right? And I see that in all sorts of companies, in all sorts of startups, where they want to say our mission is to serve these communities, and then they create a product that doesn't consider them,
Nope.
doesn't consider their problems, doesn't. And so this group of women, it was my immediate reaction was like, where are my friends? Where's Safia Noble? She wrote an entire book on Google's algorithms. It's
Really?
called Algorithms of Oppression. I mean, it changed my life when I saw it. I almost wanted to like drop all the things, become the Joan of Arc of like algorithm fairness. Like just throw down my badge and be like, this is important.
This is my mission.
Yeah.
Yo, I swear, there are moments I feel like that in tech, and I'm like, this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna get this message out there because tech is that valuable, and when I gotta get my people in line. But
yes. And then you're like, oh, but it would be good if I didn't. And this is the challenge, right? And what happened to Timnit Gebru when you call people out on their bad behavior, call companies, businesses out on bad behavior and bad choices, you get fired. And granted, luckily, she's well known in the industry and everyone understands.
yes, I was familiar with her work. Yes,
And
yes.
she's an AI ethicist. So we understand what she's there to do. But for so many of us, where we're the workers or the leadership, and we make these calls and we are either let go or pushed out or fired, we then remember this whole layer, they're all the same. So they go and whisper to their friends and they're like, oh, you know what, that Noelle, I don't know what it is, but I'm not, I would just be real careful with that choice. And that's all it takes to not have me hired anywhere. Luckily, I also, this is another reason you build your brand and you build that brand independent of the company, though you may love them as you can, certainly as a person of color, because you want to show the value that you can provide that is independent of who you end up working for or even the business you have at that time, because that value can, again, it's harder for someone to be like, oh, that Noelle, they'll be like, but I mean, she was just on NBC Nightly News, she got mentioned in Forbes, like, what do you, I don't know, it doesn't match up. But when there's nothing, that
Then
voice becomes
it becomes
much louder.
bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So
Wow.
now I'm so passionate about, like, it doesn't even matter what you do. If you're a product manager, if you're a program manager, or a project manager, like, just start documenting what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're thinking, the impact you're having. And all of us want to make that impact. Document it so that it lasts and lives longer than these small conversations where someone can go and immediately discredit you, because you happen to be a person who's willing to press that sore spot in a company around its implementation of diversity practices.
Yeah.
Because it's not okay to take the credit and call it out, and then, just like you said earlier, and not do the work, not have your numbers reflect your platform. That's good. No, not anymore.
Okay. So yeah, social dilemma. What did you gain from it? You come from such a deep technical background. What was your take, and what should folks that are watching it that might not have the technical lens? What do they need to be looking out for?
Yeah, so one of my favorite things about it, I already told you my least favorite thing.
We gotta went in because it's needed. But yeah,
I know. But my favorite thing about it was really understanding. I think there was a quote, I wrote it down while I was watching it, and it was like, if you don't know what the product is that's being sold, the product is you. That you
I
are the
remember
product.
that, and I was like, oh, very
Yes, and
uncomfortable when you realize that.
That's right. And if you are the product, the truth doesn't matter. All they are doing is trying to get you, the product, to stay on the platform. And this is where that's the dilemma, right? Is that companies like Google and Facebook are going to do whatever it takes to keep you engaged, even if they're showing you things that aren't true, because the truth actually doesn't matter. They're getting paid to keep you on the platform. They're not getting paid to tell you the truth. They're not journalists. It doesn't even matter to them. And they've created a revenue model for people to put content on the platform that serves themselves. So now put Google and Facebook and these kinds of companies together with people who can now pay to get in front of you. And you wonder why. I mean, there's so many of these kind of tragic stories where one of the people who ended up shooting up a school, it was proven that they went to YouTube, they saw a video. In order to keep them on the platform, the algorithm ended up surfacing other videos that proved that initial video's point. Yeah, and it took them down this rabbit hole that made them confident that the world was, going to hell in a handbasket, and that the reason that was happening, of course, was a flawed reason, which was some kind of, whatever it was, whether it was race, whether it was gender, whether it was LGBTQ, like, it doesn't matter, because all it was doing was serving this single need. And in this case, the person who paid for that content ended up being a radical organization that had money. And that's extremely dangerous.
And this
right?
was
Is
proven?
it anyone can say?
That whole trail was able to be tracked and proven?
Oh, yes. Many times. There's another one. It was called, I can't remember, Pizza something, Pizza Crate, Pizza. Anyway, you guys could look it up. But it showed basically this series of videos, and it created this entire fallacy, like a conspiracy theory around pizza joints, like pizza places that made pizza, being an undercover operation for child trafficking.
Oh,
and
I've
it
heard
wasn't
stuff like that before. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't true, but because all of these videos could be surfaced, where if I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have is that really true? And then I go and look, and there's a whole sea of things just like it, and none of it's true. it's hard for your brain
To
because we
actually make
default to
that.
truth.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, to
yes.
go, how could it not be true if there's all this content, even if all that content was fabricated? And so enter into the world of deep fakes, which makes it even worse because now we can create personas. We can take the face of Trump, of Obama. We can take the face of, rap artists and entertainers, and we can make them say whatever we
Yo, I've seen some
want.
deep fakes, and let me tell you.
I'm telling you. So how do we solve this? It's not a Black Mirror sad story. We all end up, in Skynet at the end.
Jesus, are you coming?
Yeah, now's the time. But
Oh
one thing, the biggest thing is that we as individuals have to continue to seek truth. We
man.
have to continue to, but like, let that radar, our intuition will tell us, even because deepfakes aren't even that great. But if it serves us, our brain is willing to let go of the stuff that doesn't make sense, the weird fuzziness around the mouth, the weird hair. We're like, but it said what I want to believe, so I believe it. And so we have to really focus on being seekers of truth and finding out from multiple sources, right? If I go and YouTube a thing on something that I saw on YouTube, chances are I'm going to find more things that ratify that. But if I go from YouTube to Google to NPR to Wikipedia to other sources, I can find out. Like, I mean, granted, it stinks because it's more work for us,
More work
and
for
the
us,
average
but the
more
level of
average human's not going to
responsibility.
want to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I think that's where we're going today. Even when you look at healthcare, when you look at all these different things, there's this now a heavier level of responsibility that as individuals, as patients, as people, we need to start taking for ourselves to position ourselves to understand what is coming out into the marketplace, how is it benefiting me, how is it hurting me, how does
yep,
my voice matter, and it creates a bit of attraction because we're already fighting in this era where we feel we
that's
don't
right.
have the voice, we don't have the space.
That's
But
right.
man,
Yeah. So the good news is that we can be truth seekers, but the other thing is that there's two sides of the good side of the house. One is you can understand what it takes to detect falsities and educate people. So you can become kind of a false detector. I mean, now we're seeing companies like Twitter and Facebook even create these ways, and like our president said stuff that wasn't true, and it had an algorithm that addressed
that
it,
was able to
fact
pick
checked it,
it.
and closed it off, took the content out. So we
Oh,
have to have ways of doing that. But the other thing is getting into building detection. So a lot of uh, universities like MIT and Stanford have organizations that are building detectors that will be used by these large companies in research, because it's kind of like cybersecurity, right? There's someone who's always going to be attacking and always getting better at that attack, which means there has to be someone always
who's
better at
building
defending,
and yeah,
right? And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so the same is true for information, and information is the easiest way to declare war,
Wow.
especially in the era of deepfakes.
Yeah, yeah,
So we have to become ambassadors of truth
yeah.
and figure out ways to, stamp things with authenticity, create like nonprofit, community-driven organizations that care about the truth, and but I mean, as with all things, like, how do you make sure that their interests don't get misaligned,
Don't.
that they don't
Whew.
get, influenced by more money, that they don't go, oh my gosh, we could make $3 billion if we just add an advertising model, which is what happened to Facebook, right? Facebook didn't have an ad model until they saw Google making all this money, and they're like, we could do that, and they hired the guy who did it at Google, brought him to
To
Facebook, and
Facebook.
now
Yes, yes. From
yeah,
the yeah.
from the movie. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's interesting, but it is a dilemma because there's nothing tangible that we can do right now. We need to first identify that it's a problem and then
Awareness.
start, yes,
Awareness.
awareness. Yes.
Then
And then pick a side and start building
anywho,
and
so
start
what
building.
is up on in the pipeline? 2021 is upon us. God willing, we are alive and well. What is
Yes.
what is Noelle planning for her 2021 vision?
Yes, so I am excited because I just finished building curriculums for some universities nationwide in data science and analytics. So those will go live in the
Woo!
new year. Yep, so I'm
Yes,
excited about that.
awesome.
But I'm also excited about just in general advocating for, like, AI has often been shrouded and protected and in this space of just people who had money to use it, who were smart enough to use it. And that's no longer the case. Many companies like Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Google are democratizing these models.
Yes.
But the problem is most companies don't know how to even use them. Now that their web developers could use AI models, they don't even, the dots aren't laid out and they can't be connected.
Yeah.
So that's why I built AI Leadership Institute, is to go into companies and say, you don't have to hire a data scientist. You don't have to get a machine learning expert. You don't have to build a model from scratch. You can go in and see there's a factory of pre-built models that can solve these problems. You just need a couple of people who already are already building your website, already building your mobile app, and educate them on how to integrate into your systems. And so that's kind of my hope, is to, like, even if it's just the models that increase accessibility, right? Adding chatbots, adding voice, being able to add immersive reading, so that more people can use the technology. That's my big goal for 2021.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you
Yes,
so
it's
much.
been amazing.
In just a little while of our conversation, I feel like I'm an AI expert now,
I know. Yeah, and if you're like me, your brain's like pulsating and like hurts
it
a little bit.
The level of excitement, because I work with partners and customers within our AI portfolio, our data analytics portfolio, but I'm always so excited to learn about other people's journey and where the opportunity lies, where is it going, right? Because there's always someone that is way more technical than I am. I love the people side of it, so as I get to learn more about the technical side, then it's like, all right, I'm connecting where does the opportunity lie? How can we use this to solve problems? So wow, thank you so much for taking time and getting off in here and chatting with us at The Rosie Effect, Noelle. Thank you.
It was my pleasure, and I love it, and hopefully we'll have another chat in the new year.
I would love that. Until next time.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening in to today's episode of The Rosie Effect. What stood out to you about the conversation? Was there more clarity on what AI is all about and the opportunity that it presents for you in your career or your business ideas? I'd love to know your thoughts. Share it over right here on the podcast, or join in on the conversation over at therosieeffect.com. Don't forget to leave us a review on the podcast, because it tells these algorithms that we're doing something here, and it can share it more with folks like you looking to level up in their career or build those businesses that create change in our economy today. So don't forget to follow us on social media platforms: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We're all up in there at The Rosie Effect, TheRozyEffect. Well, until next time, because this continues to get more exciting. The feedback that we get, we adapt and adjust, and the community that we're building, I'm just so excited for the impact and change that we're creating. Thank you all so much. And as always, I'm your host, Rosie Amponsa.